Hey guys, Jeremy here, Terra Nova Brew Builders. I'm here going to show you guys how to change out a pump seal on the pump that's inside of our Diatomaceous earth filter here at Slow Cider. Last time we used it, it turns out the pump seal blew out. A little overpressurization on the inlet side caused that to happen. So I had to order a new one. It finally came in about 2 weeks later. And I'm going to go ahead and change this out, so stick with me. I'll show you a couple of the steps to change out this pump seal, and hope you guys learn some stuff. Hey guys, here at Slow Cider, I'm just about to take this pump head apart so we can replace the seal inside the centrifugal pump here. Of course, there are a couple DIN fittings. You got a DIN fitting here, got a DIN fitting there. So we're going to take both of those off. We're also going to take off this retention ring that holds the back plate and the front plate together. Once we take off the DIN fittings and the retention ring here that holds those plates together, we're going to take out the bolts that hold the motor to the frame and slide that whole motor back. And then we should be able to remove the front plate from the back plate, which will allow us to have access to the O-ring, to the seal. And then we'll replace that seal, put it all back together, and get this thing filled with ozone so we can run a filtration today. Our filtration's taking a little bit longer just because this pump seal needs to be changed out. So it's going to add about 40 minutes to the whole process. So yeah, stick with me. Check it out. Hope you guys learned something. All right, now I've removed the DIN fittings, removed the retention ring there. I also removed all the bolts so I can pull this motor back, and that's what I'm going to do now. See if I can catch this on camera. It's not too difficult. See, there we go. Just pulled it right back, and everything came off right there. And in terms of this pump head, we got to pull that right off there, just like that. And now we see the actual pump. And then we're going to pull that pump out of there, set it on the back side of the motor, and remove this nut here. Sometimes that nut is just a huge pain in the ass to remove. It's what holds this impeller on there. And so we're going to go ahead and replace that remove that, pull this plate off of there, which is another huge pain in the ass. And then we'll go ahead and replace that seal. So check this out. I'll come back as soon as I have this motor on its backside and I'm trying to pull this plate off. It's very difficult, so I want to show you how difficult that is. All right, so we're back. I took the little nut off of here. That wasn't too terribly difficult. The plate itself is very snug on the spindle that's in the middle. You'll see there's a little key in there as well. So it's kind of slammed down onto that spindle really, really tight. And then over time, depending on how long it's been, sometimes diatomaceous earth will get all the way inside there. Really fine particulates will get in there and turn into a little bit of almost like concrete rock, some kind of adhesive almost inside there, and it makes it very difficult to get this thing off. So I'll put 2 long pieces, see if I can get some good pressure pushing up from underneath across a long span. And I'll push down on both of these at the same time. Push down, push down, push down a bunch of times. That'll get it to inch up or by just like a couple millimeters here and there. And then I'll take both these things out, spin it around, and do it again from a different angle. And I'll do that again and again and again in order to get this thing pulled all the way up and off. So let me go ahead and work on this for a few, and then I'll come back as soon as this thing has been pulled off fully. All right, so I finally got this impeller off of the spindle in the middle. Of course, it was on there like this, pulled it off. It was very difficult. So I'm going to actually see if I have a local machinist that can actually bore this out maybe just a little bit more. I feel like I can feel some burrs in here. So maybe that's what's holding this thing up on the spindle. It hasn't always been this way. At some point in the past, maybe a couple of years back, it wasn't as tight, but it's been getting worse. I can feel maybe a little bit of deformation on here, but primarily on the inside. So I'm going to see if I can get that bored out so that next time it just slides on and off really easily, and then we can actually depend on that nut that was holding it in place to actually fasten the impeller in place as opposed to the friction on the spindle. So anyways, that's just something I'm going to work on here to make this easier next time the pump seal has to be changed out. We usually change it out like once a year, maybe every other year. I think it's been something like 14 months or something like that since we changed it out last. And really this happens because we are trying to do so many things all at the same time. It's always best to have a helper if you have time for that and the money to employ a helper. I think it's very, very worth it, because there are always times in which you're trying to do multiple things all at the same time, and it's difficult to do that. Sometimes you become less efficient, and overpressurization occurs, or other issues can occur, which cause us to do something like this, change out a pump seal. Pump seal doesn't cost that much. It's like $100. It takes a couple weeks to get here. But really what we're focused on is the downtime in between. And basically when we have a down pump on this filter, we can't run it, and it costs us quite a bit of money every week that we can't filter cider. So we're going to try to keep our equipment always up to date, ready to go. Maybe keep another pump seal on hand, so I'll probably actually just order one here in a couple months to have it on hand. So if it does happen, I can take it all apart that day, fix it up, and get it back in service. So yeah, this is a very, very difficult thing to remove. Like I was saying, I ended up having to get my long pry bar and my framing hammer to pry this thing up and off of there. It actually worked really well when I was able to put more pressure here towards the center to pull this thing off, as opposed to kind of around the edges here, which is what I was doing with the other tools that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, that's the impeller that we pulled off. Okay, now we can see in here the pump seal that is down here. It's a two-part pump seal. I'm going to go ahead and pry this off with a flathead screwdriver. It comes off of the base down there. And then underneath this, you'll see is, I believe it's a Teflon friction seal. So the backside of this front seal has a bunch of carbon on it, and then that carbon sits against the Teflon and spins so that it's nice and smooth. So we're going to pull this guy off right now. Let's see if I can get this on camera. There it is, came right off of there, no problem. Beautiful. So I'm going to take that thing off, and it doesn't look terrible, but really where the issue is inside here. Let's see if we can get that. Is there's like a rubber seal on the inside of this, not up here, but inside this gap where that spring is, there's that rubber seal. So somewhere along that rubber seal inside there, we have a little leak, just a little one, and when we have pressure on the inlet side, it ends up leaking through that rubber to the interior space inside here, and then comes out the backside through this carbon surface on the backside, comes out of there, and then leaks through that little gap between the Teflon and the spindle. Looks like that's spinning nice. Right there, that's beautiful, nice and smooth. All right, so now the next step is to actually remove this whole Teflon piece, and we're going to replace that whole thing, because really what happens is the carbon wears down over time, and then eventually you'll get to the stainless portion, and then you'll start hearing it kind of squeak a little bit once you even just get close to the stainless. The stainless and the Teflon don't flow as smoothly as the carbon does against that Teflon. So that's another thing that you could always listen for, is a little bit of squealing at the pump. If it starts squealing, you know that you've run out of the carbon on the backside, and you need to probably replace this piece. In that particular situation, you might actually just be able to leave this seal in here, because these seals don't really wear down very often on the backside. It's usually always this piece that wears down, but you can't purchase them separately. They come as a pack, because technically they want you to change out both to make sure that the integrity of the seal system is as good as possible, as high as possible. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and remove this piece here. That's sometimes difficult, so just use a little flathead and see if we can get around it, pry it up a little bit. Beautiful. Looks like we popped it up. All right. Cool. So that's just the back side of the seal. And if water makes it past there, then it's just leaking onto the ground. So yeah, I got these things here, got two parts. There's like the rubber part that sits into the stainless. And then there's also the Teflon piece that fits into that rubber. All right, beautiful. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up really well. I'll just use probably some Star Sand and some isopropyl alcohol, make sure it's all cleaned up really well. I'll pull out the new back plate as well as the seal, and we'll put those on together. Check it out. All right, so we are here at Slow Cider, just about to replace the pump seal and the Diatomaceous earth filter. So we have a couple components here, some things I want to talk about real quick. This is the pump seal. This is the back plate. They come together at all times, so we're going to replace both at the moment. The KY is a water-based lubricant specifically for this seal. It's water-based so that it can break up into solution when we go and clean this vessel, and it's no longer going to be on the pump seal itself. It's just meant to assist in putting the pump seal on and compressing it a little bit when we put the impeller on there. And then once we run water through the system, this will all break up and it won't enter any of the product. This lubricant is something I'm going to put on the pump shaft seal. This shaft here is it's a little difficult to get the impeller on, so I'm using just a very, very fine layer of the lubrifilm. That's a NSF lubricant. I believe it's petroleum based, and it's not a siliconized lubricant as well. So specifically, they say do not use the silicone lubricants for this, and I have a few of those as well, a couple spray ones, and then as well as a almost like a jelly as well. But I don't use either of those. We have multiple lubricants here in the cidery for different things, of course, but the KGI is really good for pump seal installation, and then this is good for any mating surfaces that you need to come together a little bit easier. So I'll use this when I'm like replacing or changing out seals inside of keg couplers. When I take the keg coupler apart, I will put a little bit of the lubrifilm on the shaft that goes into the main coupler. That'll allow the shaft to enter the coupler a little bit more smoothly, and over time it just makes it really much easier on the coupler itself. And I've noticed that it decreases the likelihood of somebody breaking the handle on the coupler, because sometimes you got people moving really quick in the tasting room trying to change out a keg, and they pull on the handle, pull it up, and you might snap it off because a lot of those handles are just cast aluminum or cast steel, and over a long period of time, with people yanking on them, they'll end up breaking off. I've seen it several times now, so always doing a little bit of maintenance on the keg couplers helps a lot, and this is what we use on those keg couplers too. So that was a little bit about the components that we need to install this. I'm going to go ahead and take all this stuff apart, install the back plate, and then we will put a little bit of lubricant onto this guy, and we will slide it on there, and then we will install the impeller, and then we'll install the retention nut for the impeller, and then we can go ahead and flip this thing back up onto and install it back onto the DE filter how we had it. All right, so I'm going to install this back plate. I'm going to put a little bit of the KY lubricant, that water-based lubricant in there. That helps the rubber kind of seat down in there, make sure it's all fully seated. I also put a little bit of KY on the inside of that seal to allow this Teflon to sit in there properly. It doesn't matter which way this goes. It can go that way, it doesn't matter. It's not going to be upside down. So then we're going to push this into place inside the rubber that we put in there first. We want to make sure that the rubber seats properly. And then we'll go ahead and push this guy in all the way. And there we go. Looks pretty good. Feels pretty good. I don't believe anything is sticking up anywhere around there. Feels just about even all the way around. There we go. Great, so it protrudes just a little bit above the surface of the rubber, so you're not going to try to get it flush with the rubber. The rubber is going to be depressed a little bit more into that little cavity. So if you're trying to push it down a lot, remember that it does protrude a little bit above the surface. Let's just make sure that you've pushed it down all the way around equally, and make sure that you're checking the reveal, I guess you could call it, how much is above the surface of the rubber. Make sure that it just seems like it's equal all the way around, and you push this thing down as far as you can possibly push it. There we go. All right, that's in. Now we're going to use a little bit more of the KY, and we're going to put that on the spindle, and then we're going to slide our pump seal over the top. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of lube that up a little bit right there. Beautiful. So that's all nicely lubricated. Go ahead and grab this pump seal. Pulling it out of the package right now. I'm going to go ahead and show you this real quick. There's a decent amount on the back side there. And then my fingers just have a little bit more of that lubricant on there. Looks really nice. Nice and clean. That's what it's supposed to look like in there. It's a good seal all the way around. Fantastic. So now that that's on there, we can go ahead and depress this top ring over the spindle. So let me take this off again. You'll see that there's like a bottom ridge here. You need to push this top portion onto the bottom portion before you install the impeller. So let me, I might need both hands to do this, so stick with me. I'll show you when I have it on there. Once it's actually depressed over the top of it, then it's going to stay in place usually. Pretty much right after you have that pushed down, you want to throw your impeller on there to really hold it in place. Let's check this out. All right, like I was saying, once you push it down past that little ridge, then it's going to stay in place. It doesn't really want to move back up. The spring will try to push it back up, which is totally fine. But really what holds it in place from here on out is the impeller. The backside of the impeller, which is right here, that backside sits against this surface, okay? And this whole thing spins on here, just like so. we're going to go ahead and install the impeller with that key on the same side, of course. But I'm going to go ahead and use some of that lubrifilm on this spindle here. That'll hopefully help us install it. It's always very difficult to remove and install. So I'm going to go ahead and put some lubrifilm on there and start installing this impeller. All right, so I got the impeller head in place. It's right on top of the key that's in there. I don't know if you can actually see that. Probably not too well. Not so much. Can't really see the key that's in there, but it's right above that key. And I'm going to go ahead and push down on the impeller as close to this area as possible in the middle. Try to keep that pressure equal around here as I'm pushing down. And kind of give it a little back and forth wiggle to try to push it down onto that spindle. It has a decent way to go until the bottom side of the impeller hits the top side of that seal. So it looks like the top side of that seal is pushed up a little bit. That's fine because the bottom side of this guy will push it back down in place where it's supposed to be once we get there. So it's going to take me a minute to do this, and I will show you what it looks like when I'm done. Check it out. Okie dokie, so we've got this impeller head installed onto the spindle. I ended up using stainless steel T to kind of fit right on top of there. I held it in place with my fingers, just like so, and hit it on top a little bit, just gave it a few taps with my framing hammer, and it was able to push it down on the spindle somewhat easily. Wasn't too difficult at all. Just took a few taps to put it down in place. I'm going to show you, see if we can see down here, catch a little glimpse of how close we are. Yeah, you can see inside here that the backside of the impeller has compressed the pump seal. Looking pretty good in there. It's fantastic. That's exactly what you want it to look like. We're going to spin it a little bit. You'll kind of see it inside there. Beautiful. That's looking real good. That's what we want to see. Fantastic. So now that this is in place, we're going to go ahead and reinstall this guy and this guy on here. This will be snug, not super duper duper tight, just snug, and that will hold this whole thing in place. So I'm going to maybe give this one more tap to see if I can get it down another millimeter or so, and then we will install this nut and reinstall the entire pump onto the DE filter. All right, so we are back here. I've just finished reinstalling the impeller head. It's pushed down fully. I've tightened this nut with my longer adjustable wrench, this guy here. So I have a little bit of a longer lever arm to give me some snug on that. Doesn't have to be super duper tight. You definitely don't want to torque this thing down at all. If it gets too tight, if you go too tight on it, then you'll notice this thing won't spin. And you kind of want it to just do that when you go and spin it by hand. You'll notice if you tighten it down too much, you'll go to spin it and it'll just move like a couple inches. And then of course, when you start up your pump, you'll be able to tell that it's struggling spinning that spindle. So that means you got to loosen this guy up. And I've done that too. A couple of years ago, tightened this thing up too much, realized that the pump was struggling, had to take the whole thing back apart. But unfortunately, I didn't realize that until I was already starting to operate the machinery. Kind of started it all up and got everything going, realized this is not going to work, had to break it all back down, fix the nut on the impeller, and then start again. So that caused me an extra about 6-hour day. So yeah, we're going to try to stay away from that kind of stuff. So yeah, right now we have this black gasket back in place. We're going to try to make sure that's somewhat even. It's not super tight. We're just going to try to put it on there all the way around the entire pump head. Make sure that it's we're trying to get it to sit against this interior piece as close as possible, evenly all the way around. Once we have that in place, then we could take our pump head and put it down on top of that black seal, like so. Fantastic, beautiful, got that. And then we're just going to put the ring on there to hold it in place because we're going to need to rotate this whole thing a little bit once we go to install it. So I'm not gonna tighten it up super tight. I'm just gonna get the nut put through this hole, catch it on there, and then I'm gonna throw this whole thing back onto the DE filter platform, and then we'll reinstall those DIN fittings, and then we will tighten this nut up to cinch it all together. Check this out. All right, so sometimes it's very difficult to get this ring back on here because you actually have to get the bolt through the bottom hole, squeeze it real tight, real tight. Sometimes I'll use my pliers to catch on the top side and the bottom side here in order to squeeze it together. And then once I squeeze it together, I'll use my other hand to just throw the nut on there. But right now I was able to get it with my hand, use my left hand to squeeze it together and then catch the nut. Once you catch it, then you can actually use your tools to give it 2 turns to make sure that it's actually on there. You can see that it has a couple turns to make sure it's caught. Now we're going to go ahead and throw this pump back onto the DE filter. All right, so we have the pump back onto the DE filter, onto that little platform down there. We've kind of put this little DIN connection together and this little DIN connection together. We can see if they'll start threading together. We might need to pull the pump a little bit closer. The reason why I'll leave this somewhat loose for the moment being, because you might need to rotate the motor in relation to this pump head, because of course that back plate is fixed to the motor, and if the front plate of the housing isn't oriented vertically, or at least this output isn't oriented vertically to connect to here, you won't be able to reinstall the whole thing. So this portion is easy. It's always going to be right in the center. Doesn't matter where you spin this thing. But of course, sometimes this guy is maybe tilted off a little bit, just depending on how you've installed it. So right now, I think I actually got it spot on the first time around. So I'm just going to give myself a little thread on that. Seems like it caught. That's good. I'm going to pull this back. Got it to move forward a little bit more. And then I'm going to see if it tightens on there. Great, it does. So I'm going to go ahead and do all this by hand. This will pull the pump forward. All right, that's good right there. Pull the pump forward a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and give it, make it pretty tight here. It's not a situation where you can really make these things too tight. They really have some large threads on it. And this seats against a blue gasket on the inside, so it's going to be seating in there really nicely no matter what. So you get it nice and snug, and then you can give it a couple good like body weight snugs on that on the very end. So cool. So that's nice and snug, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just kind of kneeling right now. I'm going to put a little bit of weight on it. There we go. Boom. That's nice and tight. And I'm going to do the same thing here. This one's a little bit more difficult because this DIN tool that I have is not the right size, of course, but it can bend. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this together up here. See if I can catch it. Beautiful. This is usually like a two-hand job here because I need to hold the backside on there as I'm turning with my right hand. So I'm going to go ahead and just use this time to tighten everything up here. Reinstall the bolts for the motor onto the platform, and then we'll be ready to fill this thing with ozone and start our setup process for today's filtration.